Times are uncertain and you're full of doubt. COVID runs rampant, so cover your mouth. You can't go outside, there's no easy way out. But there's a place you can go. Next to a train, no take cluster. Next to a train, no take cluster. Next to a train, go, go, go. Next to a train, no take cluster. Next to a train, no take cluster. Next to a train, no take cluster.
Woo! All right, intercultural. 2 in 1 week. It's a lot, I know. It is a lot. But I want to talk about, got the laptop here of course, I want to talk about chapter 9, and I want to talk about 3 things that stood out to me. Excuse me. So, the first thing is on page 184, there's that really helpful conflict grid, and this relates directly to Hofstede's cultural values, which we've talked about before, which is nice. Again, a lot of things in here connect. And I want to talk about the 4 approaches to workplace conflict. So the first one is the impartial approach, and that's a mix of individualism and small power distance. And that means in the workplace, there's personal freedom and equal treatment. And when you go to face a conflict or talk about an issue, you talk about it in a very objective, upfront way, and the relationship doesn't matter as much, right? So not only are we equal, but the way in which we talk about this issue, we're going to do it in the most objective way possible and try and leave emotions out of it. Okay, and that's kind of that individualistic, we want fair treatment. And this is kind of how you and I would deal with conflict in a class, right? Like, there's a very small power distance between us, or at least I try and set it up that way. And then if there is an issue, I'm probably pretty upfront about it with you, and I kind of tell you what needs to be done without wanting to hear really excuses or anything like that. Although maybe I would take those into account, we're going to try to deal with it objectively. So that's the impartial approach. The second one is the status achievement approach. So this is individualism again, but with a large power distance. So you have personal freedom in the workplace, but you earn inequality. Okay, so you move up and you know that once you're a manager, people are going to question you a bit less and you have more rights in a way. So bosses hold rights above the average worker. It is earned. And for us, and maybe you can think about your job, the United States is really a mix of this, the status achievement, and impartial. So maybe your bosses do treat you pretty equally, but deep down you both know they have the right to let you go whenever they want. They do have some power over you. There's more than one reason you do what they say. It's not just because you're like, well, I get paid to do what they say. There's a power distance there between you two. That's status achievement. The third one, benevolent approach. So this is collectivism with a large power distance. You have an obligation to others, and there's an asymmetrical interaction treatment. So managers play the parent role, and there's a good example of that with the Disneyland story in the chapter. And very rarely do subordinates directly challenge managers. So you purposely don't challenge the status quo, don't challenge your manager, the people above you, for the betterment of the workplace. That's where the collectivistic part comes in. So you stay in your place for the greater good is a good way to think about it. So that's the benevolent approach. Then lastly, we have the communal approach, which is the least common. And it's very important that we remember it is the least common, because there's a good reason why. Okay, so this is collectivism and a small power distance. So you have authentic, interdependent connection to others and a genuine equality via respectful communication at all levels. Okay, so there's small power distance, and you're all working to achieve the greater good, whatever that may be. Why is this the least common? Think about that for a second. Why would equal treatment for all of us and collectivism in the sense of we're going to do what's best for us, why is that so hard to navigate? Well, thinking about a job or a classroom, there has to be somebody who steps up, right? And if everybody's opinion is valid and on the same level, it can be really hard to get somewhere. So unless you're so collectivist and so in sync that everybody moves in one motion, like a colony of ants, right? There's just such perfect communication, no arguments, and you all move forward, which that's atypical for humans. That's why this is so rare, is typically you need that person that's standing up and above some others to direct people. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's why the communal approach is so rare. You hardly ever see that. So that's the grid, again, page 184. And I think if you look at that grid, you'll come to understand those 4 approaches pretty quickly. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about are conflict resources, and I really like this section because it has a lot to do with like historical conflict and things like that. So there's tangible or intangible rewards that people want in a dispute. So the reason we're arguing is over resources, and those can be tangible or intangible. And tangible would be like money, goods, etc. And some are truly scarce and limited, but others are just perceived to be scarce and could be rearranged. And what I mean by that is maybe there is only $5,000 a month and you have 10 employees. So the money can't really, to be fair, the money can't be spread around. Okay, but then you have the same situation where if we're talking about money, that is a tangible resource, but maybe the CEO, and we've seen this, right? The CEO is making 10 times, 100 times the average worker. So it seems like, and the company will tell you, well, you're making as much as we can pay you right now. That it seems to be scarce, but it's a perception, because if the CEO were to be more selfless and didn't want to have 3 homes and travel around the world all the time and all that stuff, then the wealth could be spread out, the money could be spread out. So that's what it means by perceived scarcity and actual scarcity, and that's tangible. And then you have intangible resources, which are those deeply felt desires or emotional needs in an exchange. Okay, so the example the book gives is like 2 men fighting for the boss's attention. So that's not a true resource as far as something we can have and grab and own, but sometimes, and you can probably think about that in your own workplace, if it feels like someone is getting all the attention of your boss or coworkers, that seems like a resource to us, and maybe we feel a bit jealous or annoyed, and then we start to grasp or vie for that same attention, and then there's conflict, or there can be conflict. So typically we negotiate in 3 different ways, and the first one is differentiation, okay? And that's taking an active stance to acknowledge the different cultural perspectives and lenses in a conflict situation and work toward a goal or vision, a shared goal or vision. Okay, so that would be a really best case scenario. You can sit down with whomever you're having a conflict with and really theoretically talk about what's happening and why things are happening. So I feel this way, and maybe you have the self-knowledge there, the knowledge of self to say, I feel this way because. Why do you feel the way you feel? What can we do moving forward? Okay, we are arguing over our boss's attention, which isn't a true resource. Just because the boss isn't giving equal attention to us, that may not mean anything. You and I, let's see, we get paid the same, we've gotten raises at the same time, so why are we even fighting in the first place? That's differentiation. And maybe you're working toward a shared goal of, fighting less, or coming to your boss, the both of you at the same time, and telling your boss, hey, we feel like you give him more attention, and we know it's not that big of a deal, but it's been bothering us. Again, best case scenario, differentiation. Number 2, expansion. Okay, that is an active search for alternative paths or creative solutions that enlarge the amount, type, or use of available resources for mutual gains. So that would be in a conflict. You decide, if the money's scarce, okay, what can we do to actively raise more money? Well, is money really even the issue? And maybe, okay, yeah, you think it is. So expansion would be purposely going out or coming up with those creative solutions to make more money, find more money in the budget. That's expansion. And then you have compensation. So you're in a conflict with somebody. Conflict parties offer exchanges or concessions for conflict issues they value differently. So you can't really come to an agreement, so somebody gets paid off. That's how I kind of think about it. So right now, we've been in the house a month. Our yard still isn't done. So at this point, I'm wondering, the guy who sold us the house, I'm like, okay, this is a bit of a conflict because I want this to be done now, a month ago, and you're taking your time. So am I going to have to step in and do the work, and then you compensate me for doing the work, for hiring? I'm not going to go out there probably and till the yard, but you compensate me for hiring the men I hire to do the yard. And that's compensation. So that usually there's a party that they just can't agree on timeline, or like I said, there's those issues that they just value differently. And right now, Sam and I, the guy who sold us the house, we're valuing time differently. So he doesn't feel in a rush, but I do because we've been here a month and I'd like a yard. So that would be compensation. That's the third type. Again, conflict resources, there's tangible, intangible, and then negotiating in those 3 different ways. And the last thing I want to talk about, and I think you all should do this, on page 194, there's that little quiz about conflict styles. And I want you to do that on a spare piece of paper and bring your score to the discussion, because I think this would be interesting to talk about. And my scores were, on obliging, I got 8, avoidance 8, integrating 11, and dominating 12, which makes some sense considering the culture I'm in and you and I are in. And I think it's interesting because, like, obliging, and I guess, integrating maybe for a typical American would be lower, and I try to integrate as much as I can, but I know ultimately dominating is hard for me not to do in a conflict situation. But compromise for us in an individualistic culture, just that word compromise, I want you to think about it. Typically, it kind of has that negative association. Compromise means to give something up for the sake of a solution. And it's hard for us not to think of it in that way. I'm giving something up that I don't necessarily want to, but I feel like I have to. Whereas in collectivistic cultures, compromise is something very positive. They probably wouldn't even use the same verbiage of giving something up. That's not realistic or useful for them to use that word. They aren't giving something up. They're purposely helping others, saving face, doing all those things we've talked about with collectivistic cultures when you're compromising. So that'll be something good to think about in that whole section. our own conflict styles. That'll change from person to person, but then obviously the culture that you and I are in affects that and how we see those 4 styles. So I thought that was interesting. I know this is a lot for 2 weeks, but try your hardest by Thursday. Get those 2 chapters read, come to the discussion, and we'll just do what we do. You guys did really awesome last week. I was really stoked to see that we could just talk and have a nice discussion, even though it's virtual. I really appreciated the work y'all put in. So keep at it, and I will see you all on Thursday. I hope you're well. Stay safe. Woodring out.